In the remote hills of Pennsylvania, 28-year-old Samuel Yoder, a humble Amish man shunned by his community for questioning tradition, spends his last dollar on a decrepit mountain cabin that no one else wanted. Living in isolation with only his loyal dog, Moses, Samuel struggles to survive while nursing wounds from losing his family, his community, and the woman he loved. When Moses discovers something extraordinary hidden within the cabin's walls, a secret that could be worth millions, Samuel must choose between the wealth that could give him everything he's ever wanted and honoring the mysterious legacy of the cabin's previous owner. His decision will not only transform his own life, but will ultimately reveal that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't measured in money, but in the lives we touch and the love we leave behind. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the morning mist. Sold for $1 to, the portly man squinted at the lone bidder, standing at the back of the crowd, his plain clothes and wide-brimmed hat marking him as different from the other buyers. "What's your name, son?" "Samuel Yoder," came the quiet reply, barely audible over the murmurs of disbelief rippling through the crowd. $1. That's all it took to buy the cabin that 17 other buyers had walked away from. They'd all seen the photographs. Walls crawling with black mold, a roof that looked more like Swiss cheese than shelter, floorboards so rotten you could see straight through to the earth below. But Samuel had seen something else in those photos, something that called to him in a way he couldn't explain. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was faith, or maybe it was simply that when you've lost everything that matters, a broken cabin on a mountainside doesn't seem like such a bad gamble. Samuel reached into his worn leather pouch, handmade by his mother before she'd turned her back on him, and pulled out a single crumpled dollar bill. It was literally all he had left in the world, the last remnant of the life he'd built before the shunning, before Sarah had chosen another, before his world had collapsed into silence and solitude. "You sure about this, boy?" The auctioneer leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Samuel. "That place ain't just run down, folks. Say it's cursed. Man who lived there before, old Herman Fisher. He went strange in his final years. Started talking to walls, burying things in the yard at midnight. When they found him, he'd been dead for months, just sitting in his chair like he was waiting for something." Samuel's dog, Moses, a German shepherd mix with one blue eye and one brown, pressed against his leg, offering silent comfort. The dog had been his only companion these past 8 months, since the shunning began. Moses didn't care that Samuel had dared to question why their communities still refused modern medicine, even when children were dying from treatable diseases. Moses didn't care that Samuel had been labeled dangerous for suggesting that perhaps God's greatest gift to humanity was the ability to learn and grow. "I'm sure," Samuel said, pressing the dollar into the auctioneer's reluctant hand. The crowd parted as he walked through, their expressions ranging from pity to bewilderment. Samuel heard their whispers, "Fool, desperate, probably gonna find him dead up there come winter." But he kept his eyes forward, his hand resting on Moses's head. The 3-mile hike to the cabin took them up a winding mountain path that hadn't seen maintenance in years. October had painted the Pennsylvania mountains in brilliant reds and golds, but Samuel barely noticed. His worn boots, the leather cracked and sole wearing thin, struggled for purchase on the loose rocks. Moses bounded ahead, then circled back, his tail wagging as if this was all a grand adventure. "Easy for you to be happy," Samuel muttered, though his lips quirked in an almost smile. "You don't understand what we've just done. That was our food money for the month, our everything money." Moses barked once, as if to say he understood perfectly well and didn't care one bit. The path grew steeper, and Samuel's breath came in visible puffs in the cool mountain air. His stomach growled. He'd had nothing but water and 2 withered apples in the last 2 days, saving that last dollar for this moment. His father would have called him prideful. His mother would have wept. And Sarah would have laughed that tinkling laugh of hers and asked if he'd finally lost his mind completely. Maybe he had. The trees began to thin, and then he saw it. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by ancient oaks, whose branches seemed to reach toward it like gnarled fingers. It was worse than the photographs had suggested. The front porch had completely collapsed on one side, giving the whole structure a drunken lean. Windows were either broken or boarded up with rotting plywood. The chimney had crumbled, leaving a gap in the roof through which he could see sky. But the foundation, Samuel knelt and examined the stonework. The foundation was solid, hand-laid by someone who knew what they were doing, probably 100 years ago or more, and the logs that made up the walls beneath the mold and decay were old-growth timber, the kind you couldn't even find anymore. Moses had no interest in architectural assessments. The dog was sniffing around the perimeter, his tail stiff, his movements purposeful. He paused at what had once been a garden, now overgrown with brambles, and began digging. "Moses, no," Samuel called, but the dog ignored him, dirt flying in all directions. Samuel picked his way through the debris on the porch and pushed open the front door. It swung inward with a groan that sounded almost like a sigh. The smell hit him immediately. Mold, decay, and something else, something medicinal and sharp. The main room was a disaster of overturned furniture, water-stained walls and scattered papers. But the stone fireplace, though filled with debris, looked salvageable, and the wooden beams overhead, despite the hole in the roof, appeared solid. He could work with this. He'd helped raise barns since he was 12, learned carpentry at his father's side before everything went wrong. His hands knew wood and stone, understood the language of building and rebuilding. A crash from outside made him spin around. Moses had knocked over what looked like an old wooden marker in the garden and was now digging more frantically than before. "Moses, stop that." Samuel hurried outside, but froze when he saw what the dog had unearthed. It was a metal box, rust-covered but intact. Moses sat back, panting proudly, his pink tongue lolling out. Samuel knelt beside the hole, his heart beating fast. The box wasn't locked, just sealed with old wax that crumbled at his touch. Inside was an oilcloth bundle. With trembling fingers, he unwrapped it, revealing a leather journal and a small brass key. The journal's first page bore a date from 40 years ago, and the name Hernan Fisher in spidery handwriting. Below that, a single line that made Samuel's blood run cold. "To whoever finds this, I'm sorry for what you're about to discover, but sorrier still for what I've had to hide. The truth is in the walls, but the truth might be more than you can bear." Moses whined, pressing closer to Samuel's side. The sun was beginning to set, painting the mountain in shades of orange and purple. Samuel looked from the journal to the cabin, then back to the brass key in his hand. It was small, delicate, the kind that might open a lockbox or a desk drawer. He stood slowly, his empty stomach forgotten, his exhaustion pushed aside by a mixture of fear and curiosity that made his hands shake. Whatever Herman Fisher had hidden, whatever secret these walls contained, Samuel was about to become its keeper. As he walked back toward the cabin, journal clutched to his chest, Moses suddenly froze. The dog's hackles rose, and a low growl rumbled from his throat. He was staring at the eastern wall of the cabin, the one where the last rays of sunlight were catching on something metallic between the logs. Samuel stepped closer, squinting in the fading light. There, partially hidden by moss and decades of dirt, was what looked like a small metal door, no bigger than a shoebox, fitted perfectly between two logs. And in its center was a keyhole that looked just about the right size for the brass key in his hand. His hand was reaching for it before his mind could form the thought to stop. The key slid in smoothly, as if it had been waiting. The click of the lock, disengaging, sounded unnaturally loud in the mountain silence. The metal door swung open, revealing a cavity in the wall, and inside, Samuel gasped, stumbling backward. Moses barked sharply, dancing on his paws, because inside that hidden compartment, wrapped in what looked like aged silk, was something that caught the dying light and threw it back in 1,000 brilliant colors. But it wasn't just what was in the compartment that made Samuel's knees weak. It was the second journal that sat beneath it, and the photograph paper clipped to its cover. A photograph of a young woman who looked exactly like Sarah, his lost love, except the clothing was from decades ago. And written on the back of the photograph, in the same spidery handwriting as the first journal, "My darling Emma, they took you from me, but they'll never find what you left behind. I've kept it safe, as I promised. Maybe someday someone who understands loss will find this. Someone who knows that love is worth more than all the treasures in the world, but also that sometimes love leaves treasures behind to heal the broken-hearted." Samuel's hands shook as he reached for the silk-wrapped object. The moment his fingers touched it, Moses let out a long, mournful howl that echoed across the mountains like a song of sorrow and hope combined. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the clearing into twilight. And there, in that broken-down cabin he'd bought with his last dollar, Samuel Yoder began to unwrap a mystery that would change not just his life, but the lives of people he hadn't even met yet. The silk fell away like water, revealing something that made Samuel's breath catch in his throat. It was a necklace, but calling it just a necklace was like calling the sun just a light. The centerpiece was a ruby the size of a robin's egg, surrounded by diamonds that formed an intricate pattern of interlocking hearts. Even in the dying light, it seemed to glow with an inner fire. Samuel had seen plenty of jewelry in his life. The English tourists who came through Lancaster County wore all sorts of fancy things. But this was different. This was art. This was history. This was worth a fortune, he whispered, and Moses whined in response. With trembling hands, he set the necklace carefully aside and picked up the second journal. The photograph of the woman who looked like Sarah stared up at him, her eyes holding the same mixture of strength and sadness he'd seen in Sarah's face. The day she told him she couldn't wait for him anymore. Couldn't risk being shunned herself. He opened the journal to the first page, September 15th, 1983. "If you're reading this, then you've found Emma's necklace. I suppose I should explain, though I'm not sure I can make anyone understand who didn't know her. Emma wasn't my wife. The world wouldn't allow that. She was married to another, a cruel man named Theodore Hartley, who owned half the county and treated her like another possession. But she was my everything. We met when she came to my jewelry shop in Philadelphia. I was already an old man by then. 58 years old, a craftsman who'd spent his life creating beautiful things for people who barely looked at them twice. She was 29, trapped in a marriage that was killing her spirit day by day. She brought me a bag of stones, rubies and diamonds that had been in her family for generations, and asked me to make something that could be hidden, something that could be sold if she ever got the courage to run. Instead, I made her something that captured who she was, fire and ice, passion and purity, all twisted together in a pattern that took me 3 months to perfect. When I gave it to her, she cried. Samuel had to stop reading. His eyes burned with unshed tears. He understood being trapped, understood the weight of a community's expectations crushing your spirit. He lit the old oil lamp he'd found on a shelf, miraculously intact, and continued reading by its flickering light. We fell in love. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed either. For 1 year she would come to my shop, and we would talk about art, about life, about dreams. She taught me to see beauty not just in gems and gold, but in the way morning light caught on window glass, in the sound of rain on cobblestones. Then Theodore found out. He didn't divorce her, that would have been a scandal. Instead, he had her committed to an asylum, said she was hysterical, delusional. Back then, a husband's word was all it took. She died there 6 months later. The official cause was pneumonia. But I knew better. She died of a broken heart. Theodore came to my shop the day after her funeral, demanded I give him the necklace, said it belonged to him as her husband. I told him I'd destroyed it. He had my shop burned down that night. I barely escaped with my life and a few precious things, including the necklace. Emma had refused to take, saying it should stay with its creator. Moses padded over and rested his head on Samuel's knee, as if sensing his distress. Samuel absently stroked the dog's fur, his mind racing. This necklace wasn't just valuable. It was evidence of a love story that had ended in tragedy. He kept reading, "I came to these mountains to hide, to grieve, to die slowly in peace. But I couldn't bring myself to sell Emma's necklace, and I couldn't bear to look at it either, so I hid it, along with proof of what Theodore did." You'll find that proof in the other hidden compartments. There are 7 in total, throughout the cabin. The key opens them all. But be warned, Theodore Hartley's family is still powerful. His grandson, Marcus Hartley, is now a state senator. If they learn the necklace exists, they'll come for it. It's not just about the money, it's about the family secret it represents. I'm leaving one more thing. In the final compartment, you'll find documents that prove the stones weren't just Emma's family heirlooms. They were stolen. Theodore's grandfather took them from a Jewish family during the Second World War, a family who fled to America with nothing. I've tracked down the descendants. Their name is Goldstein, and they live in New York City now. Whoever you are, you have a choice. You could sell the necklace. It's worth at least $50 million, maybe more. You could keep it hidden, let sleeping dogs lie, or you could do what I was too cowardly to do. You could return it to its rightful owners and expose the truth about the Hartley family. I pray you're braver than I was. Herman Fisher. Samuel set down the journal, his hands shaking. $50 million. The number didn't even seem real. He could buy 1,000 cabins with that money. He could go anywhere, be anyone, start over completely. He could even go back to his community, and they'd have to accept him. Money had a way of making people forget their principles, but even as the thoughts formed, he knew they were hollow. His community hadn't shunned him for being poor. They'd shunned him for asking questions, for refusing to let children die when medicine could save them. Money wouldn't change that. Moses suddenly jumped to his feet, growling. A second later, Samuel heard it too, footsteps on the path outside, multiple sets of footsteps. He quickly wrapped the necklace back in the silk, shoved both journals inside his shirt, and grabbed the old axe handle he'd spotted earlier. Moses positioned himself between Samuel and the door, his teeth bared. "Hello in there," a voice called out. "We know someone's here. Saw your light." Samuel's mind raced. Had someone followed him from the auction? Did they know about the treasure? "Just want to talk," the voice continued. "We're neighbors. Live down the mountain." Samuel relaxed slightly, but kept his grip on the axe handle. "Come in slow," he called back. 3 people entered, an elderly couple, and a younger woman about Samuel's age. They weren't dressed fancy, just simple mountain folk, in worn jackets and muddy boots. The old man carried a covered pot that steamed in the cool air. "I'm Walter Morrison," the old man said, eyeing Moses warily. "This is my wife Betty, and our granddaughter Amy. We saw someone finally bought old Herman's place." "Brought you some stew," Betty said, setting the pot on the broken table. "Figured you might be hungry." The smell of beef and vegetables made Samuel's stomach clench with hunger, but he stayed cautious. "That's kind of you. I'm Samuel. This is Moses. You Amish?" Walter asked, noting Samuel's plain clothes. "Was," Samuel said simply. Walter nodded like that explained everything. "Herman was a good man, strange in his last years, but good. Helped me fix my roof once when a tree fell on it. Wouldn't take a penny for it." "You knew him?" Samuel leaned forward eagerly. "Everyone on the mountain knew Herman," Amy spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft. "Careful, he used to make jewelry, you know. Before he came here, some say he was famous once. Had rich clients from all over." Samuel kept his face neutral. "Is that so?" "He told me something once," Walter said, settling into a broken chair that creaked under his weight. "Said he had a secret that could make a man rich or make him righteous, but probably not both. Never did figure out what he meant." Betty ladled stew into a cracked bowl she'd brought, handing it to Samuel. "You eat, "You're too thin." The first spoonful of stew nearly made Samuel weep. It had been so long since he'd had a proper meal. Moses, sensing the neighbors were friends, lay back down but kept watching. "Why did you buy this place?" Amy asked. "Everyone says it's cursed." "Didn't have many options," Samuel said honestly. "And I don't believe in curses." Herman didn't either, Walter said. But he did believe in justice. Talked about it all the time in his last months. Said he'd failed someone important and that failure haunted him. They talked until the stew was gone, the neighbors filling Samuel in on mountain life, the best places to hunt and fish, which springs had clean water. They offered to help him fix the roof before winter. Wouldn't hear of taking payment. Mountain folk look after each other, Betty said firmly. Herman would want us to help you. After they left, with promises to return tomorrow with tools and supplies, Samuel sat in the darkness for a long time. The necklace seemed to burn against his chest where he'd hidden it. $50 million, enough to solve every problem he'd ever have. But Herman's words echoed in his mind. A choice to be rich or righteous, but probably not both. Moses padded over to the eastern wall, sniffing at another section. Samuel held up the lamp and saw it, another small metal door, painted over, but visible if you knew to look. The second compartment. The key turned smoothly, revealing a stack of documents wrapped in oilcloth. Samuel pulled them out carefully, his heart pounding. The first was a photograph, a Nazi officer, standing next to a pile of confiscated jewelry. The second was a shipping manifest from 1943, showing items acquired from the Goldstein family. The third was a receipt of sale, showing Theodore Hartley's grandfather purchasing assorted stones from someone who'd clearly trafficked in stolen Nazi loot. But it was the fourth document that made Samuel sink to his knees. It was a letter dated just 3 months ago. "Dear Mr. Fisher, my name is Rebecca Goldstein. My grandmother, before she died, told me about the family jewels that were taken from them in Poland. She described a ruby, unique in its color and clarity, that had been in our family for 300 years. I am not writing to ask for anything. I know the chances of recovering what was stolen are almost none. But my daughter is getting married next month, and I wanted to try one more time to find some piece of our history to pass down to her. If you have any information about jewelry from that time period, please contact me. My grandmother said you were a good man who tried to help after the war. With hope, Rebecca Goldstein." The return address was in Brooklyn. The date showed Herman had received this letter just weeks before he died. Samuel looked at Moses, who was watching him with those mismatched eyes. He was going to return it, Samuel whispered. He was finally going to make it right, but he died before he could. Moses barked once, as if in agreement. Samuel stood slowly, his mind made up. He couldn't keep the necklace, not knowing what he knew now. But returning it would mean exposing himself to danger. The Hartley family was powerful, and they wouldn't want this story coming out. He thought of Sarah, of how she'd chosen safety over love. He thought of his community, how they'd chosen tradition over truth. He thought of Herman, living with regret for 40 years. "We're going to find the rest of the compartments," he told Moses. "We're going to gather all the evidence, and then we're going to do what Herman couldn't. We're going to return what was stolen and tell the truth about where it came from." Moses wagged his tail, and Samuel could have sworn the dog was smiling. As he prepared a makeshift bed in the corner that seemed least likely to collapse, Samuel felt something he hadn't felt in months: purpose. He might have spent his last dollar on this cabin, but perhaps that dollar had purchased something more valuable than shelter. Perhaps it had purchased him a chance at redemption. Not just Herman's, but his own. The next morning arrived with frost on the windows, and Moses's urgent barking. Samuel jolted awake from his makeshift bed of old blankets the Morrisons had left behind, his body aching from sleeping on the hard floor. But it wasn't discomfort that made his heart race. It was the sound of car engines coming up the mountain road. Multiple vehicles, moving fast. Samuel scrambled to the window, peering through a crack in the boards. 3 black SUVs were winding up the path, looking absurdly out of place on the rough mountain trail. His blood ran cold. Had someone already found out about the necklace? Moses growled, hackles raised. Samuel quickly grabbed the journals and the necklace, wrapping them in an old flour sack he'd found. He needed to hide them, but where? The vehicles were getting closer. The root cellar, he whispered, remembering seeing a wooden door in the floor near the fireplace. He yanked it open, the hinges screamed in protest, and dropped down into the musty darkness just as car doors began slamming outside. The cellar was cramped, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, with stone walls that wept moisture, but there in the corner, his fingers found what he was looking for. Another metal door. The third compartment. He fumbled with the key in the darkness, opened it, and shoved the flour sack inside just as footsteps thundered across the porch. "Mr. Yoder," a voice called out, polished, professional, dangerous. "We know you're in there. We'd like to have a word." Samuel climbed back up, closing the cellar door behind him. Moses stood guard, teeth bare. Through the gap in the door, Samuel could see 3 men in expensive suits and 2 others who looked like private security. "What do you want?" Samuel called out. "My name is Marcus Hartley. I believe you may have purchased property that contains items belonging to my family." Samuel's stomach dropped. Marcus Hartley, the Senator Herman had written about. Theodore's grandson. "I bought this cabin fair and square," Samuel said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Paid a whole $1 for it." There was a pause, then a laugh without humor. "Yes, we heard about that. May we come in? I think we can make this profitable for both of us." Samuel had no choice. If he refused, they might force their way in. He opened the door and Marcus Hartley entered like he owned the place, which Samuel realized with a chill his family once had. Marcus was everything Samuel wasn't. Tall, handsome in that political way, with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. His suit probably cost more than most people made in a year. The security men stayed on the porch, but their presence was felt. "Interesting place," Marcus said, looking around with apparent disgust. "My grandfather Theodore owned this land once, sold it to Herman Fisher for almost nothing. An act of charity, he always said." "What do you want?" Samuel repeated. Marcus's smile widened. "Direct. I like that. Let me be equally direct. Herman Fisher was a thief. He stole something valuable from my family, a necklace that belonged to my grandmother Emma. We've been looking for it for 40 years. The lie was so smooth, so confident, that Samuel almost doubted what he'd read in Herman's journal, almost. "I don't know anything about a necklace," Samuel said. Marcus pulled out a checkbook. "I'm prepared to offer you $100,000 for this property and everything in it. You can walk away today, buy yourself a nice place anywhere you want." $100,000, more money than Samuel had ever imagined having. But if Marcus was offering that much so quickly, "No," Samuel heard himself say. Marcus's smile vanished. "No, I just bought this place, I'm not selling. 200,000. "No," Marcus stood, his face hardening. "Yoder, you should understand something. My family has owned this county for over a century. We have friends everywhere, in the police, in the courts, in your former Amish community." The threat hung in the air like smoke. "Are you threatening me?" Samuel asked quietly. "I'm explaining reality," Marcus said. "That necklace belongs to my family. It was my grandmother's, and Herman Fisher had no right to it. If you've found it, you're in possession of stolen property." Moses growled, and one of the security men shifted nervously. "If it was stolen," Samuel said carefully, "why didn't you report it to the police 40 years ago?" Marcus's eye twitched, just slightly, but Samuel caught it. Family matters were handled differently then. "We didn't want the scandal." "Or maybe," Samuel said, finding courage he didn't know he had, "there's more to the story." The senator stepped closer, close enough that Samuel could smell his expensive cologne. "Be very careful, Mr. Yoder. You're alone up here. Accidents happen in these mountains all the time. Old cabins catch fire. People fall from cliffs. Sometimes they just disappear." "Is that what happened to Herman?" Samuel asked. Marcus smiled again, cold as winter frost. Herman died of natural causes, old age and a guilty conscience. But you're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't throw it away for something that doesn't concern you." He headed for the door, then paused. "My offer stands for 24 hours. After that, things might become unpleasant." After they left, Samuel's legs gave out, and he sank to the floor. Moses pressed against him, whimpering. The threat was real. He could feel it in his bones. These were people who could destroy him without breaking a sweat. But then he thought about Rebecca Goldstein's letter, about her daughter getting married, about her family's heritage stolen twice, once by Nazis, once by the Hartleys. "We need help," he told Moses. As if in answer, Amy Morrison appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "I saw the cars," she said. "Are you okay?" Samuel hesitated, then made a decision that would change everything. "Amy, I need to tell you something. But first, you need to promise me that if something happens to me, you'll mail a package to Brooklyn." Amy's eyes widened, but she nodded. "I promise." Samuel retrieved the flour sack from the cellar and showed her everything: the necklace, the journals, the documents. Amy gasped when she saw the ruby, her hand flying to her mouth. "My God," she whispered, "is this real?" "As real as the danger we're both now in," Samuel said. Amy was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Then she said something that surprised him. "Herman talked about you. You know." "What?" "He died before I came here. Not you specifically, but he said someone would come. Someone who'd been cast out, just like Emma was cast out. Someone who'd understand that doing right is more important than being safe." She pulled out her phone. "We need to document everything. Create evidence that can't disappear if we do." They spent the next 3 hours photographing every document, every page of the journals. Amy uploaded everything to multiple cloud services, sent copies to her email to friends she trusted. "Now," she said, "we need to find the other compartments. Herman told my grandfather there were 7. You found 3. They searched methodically, Samuel using the key on every suspicious seam and joint. Moses helped, his nose leading them to spots where the old wood had different scent. The 4th compartment was in the bedroom floor. It contained photographs of Emma and Herman together, love letters she'd written him, and medical records from the asylum showing she'd been perfectly sane when committed. The 5th was behind a loose stone in the fireplace, newspaper clippings about Theodore Hartley's business dealings, including several suspicious deaths of rivals and partners. The 6th was in the outhouse, of all places, a ledger showing Theodore's purchase of stolen Jewish artifacts from known Nazi collaborators. But the 7th compartment eluded them. They searched until dark, Moses sniffing every inch of the cabin. "Maybe Herman was wrong," Amy said, exhausted. "Maybe there are only 6. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He stood outside looking at the stars, something he'd always done when troubled. His father had taught him the constellations before their relationship fractured over Samuel's questions about their faith. "You always were too curious," his father had said the day of the shunning. "Always needed to know why instead of just accepting." But wasn't curiosity what made humans human? Wasn't the search for truth what separated them from animals? Moses suddenly barked, pointing his nose at the chimney, not the fireplace. The chimney itself, outside where it rose toward the stars. Samuel grabbed the lamp and examined the stonework. There, a stone that protruded slightly more than the others, about 7 feet up. He had to stand on an old crate to reach it, but when he pressed it, it moved. Behind it was the 7th compartment. Inside was a will, Herman's will, dated just a week before his death. It left everything to whoever finds the courage to return what was stolen to the Goldstein family. There was also a letter to Rebecca Goldstein, explaining everything, and a USB drive labeled insurance. Amy plugged the drive into her phone with an adapter. It contained video recordings of Herman telling his whole story, Emma's story, the Hartley family's crimes. In one video, Marcus Hartley himself could be heard on a recorded phone call, threatening Herman if he ever revealed the truth. This is it, Amy breathed. This is enough to destroy them. But Samuel was reading the last document in the compartment, a deed showing that Herman hadn't just owned the cabin. He'd owned the entire mountain, 300 acres purchased with the last of his money after selling everything else. And according to the will, it all now belonged to whoever returned the necklace to its rightful owners. Samuel, Amy said urgently, checking her phone. The Hartleys just filed a police report. They're claiming you stole the necklace from Marcus's office. There's a warrant being issued. Samuel felt the walls closing in, but instead of panic, he felt a strange calm descend. This was it, the moment that would define who he really was. "Can you drive me somewhere tonight?" he asked. "Amy, where?" "Brooklyn. We're going to return what was stolen." Amy looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll get my truck, pack everything." As they prepared to leave, Moses started barking furiously. Headlights were coming up the path again, lots of them. "They're coming," Amy said. "We need another way out." Samuel remembered something Walter had mentioned, an old logging road, on the backside of the mountain, barely more than a trail now. "This way," he said, grabbing the flour sack with everything inside. They slipped out the back as the vehicles pulled up front. Through the trees, they could hear Marcus Hartley's voice. "Search everything. Tear it apart if you have to." They ran through the darkness, Moses leading the way, his superior night vision guiding them. Behind them, they could hear shouts, then see flashlight beams cutting through the forest. Amy's truck was hidden behind a stand of pine trees at the old logging road. They jumped in, Moses between them, and Amy started the engine. "They'll follow us," she said. "Not where we're going," Samuel said, remembering something else from his childhood. His uncle had been a trucker, had taught him about routes the English didn't know, paths through Amish country where cars couldn't follow easily. They drove through the night, taking back roads, avoiding main highways. At a gas station in Maryland, Amy's phone buzzed with a news alert. Local man wanted for theft of historic jewels worth millions. Samuel's picture was attached. They'd used his identification photo from when he'd still been part of the community. "You're famous," Amy said, trying to joke, but her voice shook. "Infamous," Samuel corrected. They reached Brooklyn just as dawn was breaking, painting the city in shades of gold and pink. Samuel had never been to a city this big. The buildings seemed to scrape the sky itself, and the streets were already filling with people. Rebecca Goldstein's address led them to a modest brownstone in a quiet neighborhood. Samuel stood at the door for a long moment, Moses beside him, the flour sack heavy in his hands. "Whatever happens after this," Amy said, "you're doing the right thing." Samuel knocked. The woman who answered looked to be in her 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and silver streaking through dark hair. She looked at Samuel's plain clothes, at Moses, at Amy, clearly confused. "Mrs. Goldstein, my name is Samuel Yoder. I have something that belongs to your family." Rebecca Goldstein's hand flew to her chest, her eyes widening as she took in the three disheveled travelers on her doorstep. "How do you know my name? What do you, Mama, who is it?" A younger woman appeared behind her, mid-20s, with the same dark hair but laughing eyes that reminded Samuel painfully of Sarah. "I'm not sure, Miriam." Rebecca's voice was cautious. "This young man says he has something that belongs to our family." Samuel opened the flour sack and pulled out Herman Fisher's journal, showing her the first page with Herman's name. Rebecca gasped. "You knew Herman? Is he—" "He passed away a few months ago," Samuel said gently, "but he left something for you. May we come in?" "It's not safe to discuss this in the open." Rebecca studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "Come." The apartment was warm and filled with life. Photographs covered every surface, books overflowed from shelves, and the smell of fresh bread wafted from the kitchen. It was everything Samuel's childhood home had been before the coldness set in. "Sit," Rebecca said, gesturing to a worn but comfortable couch. "Miriam, make tea." Moses curled up at Samuel's feet, watchful but calm. Amy sat beside Samuel, her presence steadying. "Mrs. Goldstein," Samuel began. What I'm about to show you might be overwhelming. Your grandmother, she told you about jewels that were taken." Rebecca's face changed, hardening with old pain. "Every family has stories of what was lost. My grandmother, she spoke of many things taken by the Nazis, but especially one piece, a ruby necklace that had been in our family since the 1600s. A wedding gift from my ancestor to his bride, passed down through generations." Samuel reached into the sack and pulled out the silk-wrapped bundle. His hands shook as he placed it on the coffee table between them. "This belongs to you," he said simply. Rebecca's hands trembled as she unwrapped the silk. When the necklace was revealed, catching the morning light streaming through the window, she let out a sound that was part sob, part prayer. "Bubby's ruby," she whispered in a language Samuel recognized as Yiddish. Tears streamed down her face as she touched the stones with reverent fingers. Miriam returned with tea, saw the necklace, and dropped the tray. The crash of breaking china barely registered as she sank to her knees beside her mother. "Is it?" "Look," Rebecca said, turning the central ruby. "See the inscription inside the setting. Hebrew letters, Ahava Lola, no, love eternal." My grandmother described it exactly. She looked up at Samuel, her eyes swimming with tears. "How? Where did you find this?" Samuel told them everything. About buying the cabin with his last dollar, about Moses finding the first journal, about Herman and Emma's tragic love story. He showed them the documents proving the Hartley family's crimes, the evidence of how Theodore's grandfather had bought stolen Jewish artifacts from Nazi collaborators. "Herman loved Emma," Samuel explained, "but he also knew the necklace really belonged to your family. He spent years gathering evidence, tracking down your grandmother, trying to find the courage to make things right. He wrote you a letter 3 months ago." Rebecca nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes, I wrote to him. I never heard back. I thought it was another dead end." "He died before he could respond," Amy said gently. "But he made sure someone would find this. Someone who would do what he couldn't." Miriam was examining the documents, her lawyer's training evident in how she processed the information. "This evidence, it's explosive. The Hartley family, they're powerful. Marcus Hartley isn't just a state senator. He's being groomed for governor, maybe higher. They've already come after Samuel," Amy said. "There's a warrant out for his arrest. They're claiming he stole the necklace from them." Rebecca stood abruptly, her tears replaced by fierce determination. "They stole from us twice. Once through the Nazis, once through lies. They will not steal again." She went to an old wooden cabinet and pulled out a leather-bound album. "You want to know why this necklace matters so much? Let me show you." The album was filled with photographs, sepia-toned images of a prosperous family from before the war. Rebecca pointed to each one. "This was my great-grandfather, Abraham Goldstein, a jeweler in Warsaw, like his father before him. This was his shop." The photo showed an elegant storefront with Goldstein and Sons fine jewelry in gold lettering. "And this," she turned the page, "was the last family gathering before the war." The photographs showed at least 30 people, all dressed in their finest. In the center, a matriarch wore the ruby necklace. "Of all these people," Rebecca said quietly, "only my grandmother survived. She was 17, working as a servant in a German household. She saw them take everything from the shop, including the necklace. She remembered the Nazi officer who catalogued it, Klaus Weber. After the war, she spent years trying to trace what happened to our family's belongings." Miriam pulled out her laptop. "If we're going to fight the Hartleys, we need to move fast. Mom, call Uncle David. He's a federal prosecutor. I'll contact the Holocaust Museum. They have lawyers who specialize in recovering stolen artifacts." "Wait," Samuel said. "There's more." He pulled out Herman's will and the deed to the mountain property. "Herman left everything to whoever returned the necklace to you. 300 acres of mountain land." Rebecca shook her head. "No, you keep that. You've risked everything to bring this to us." "I can't," Samuel said. "I'm Amish, was Amish. We don't believe in profiting from doing what's right. You're not Amish anymore? Miriam asked, curious. I was shunned, cast out for questioning why we let children die from treatable diseases, when God gave humans the ability to create medicine. Rebecca and Miriam exchanged glances. You're a healer? Rebecca asked. I wanted to be. I studied what I could in secret, medical texts, anatomy books, but when I suggested we could use both faith and medicine, work with English doctors to save lives, he shrugged. They said I was corrupting our ways. Their loss, Miriam said firmly. Then, more shyly, you did an incredibly brave thing, Mr. Yoder. Samuel, he corrected, and I haven't done anything yet. The Hartleys are still out there, and they want this necklace badly enough to threaten murder. Rebecca's phone rang. She answered, listened, then paled. Yes, he's here. No, we won't. David, listen to me. She switched to rapid Yiddish, arguing fiercely. Finally, she hung up. The FBI is on their way, she said. The Hartleys filed federal charges, interstate transportation of stolen goods. David says they're moving fast, pulling every string they have. I should go, Samuel said, standing. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. You sit right back down, Rebecca said, in a tone that brooked no argument. You brought my family's heritage home. You think we're going to let you face this alone? Moses barked in agreement, and despite everything, Samuel found himself almost smiling. Miriam was typing furiously on her laptop. I'm uploading everything to multiple news outlets. The documents, the recordings, Herman's testimony. If they want to play dirty, we'll play public. The FBI will confiscate everything, Amy warned. Not if we move fast, Rebecca said. She picked up the necklace, fastened it around Miriam's neck. There, now it's being worn by its rightful owner. Let them try to take it off my daughter's neck, and see what happens. The necklace looked perfect on Miriam, as if it had been waiting decades to rest there. She touched it wonderingly, then looked at Samuel with something soft in her eyes. You said you lost someone, she said quietly. Someone named Sarah? Samuel nodded, not trusting his voice. She was a fool, Miriam said simply. Any woman would be lucky to have a man with your courage. Before Samuel could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. FBI, open up. Rebecca squeezed Samuel's shoulder. Remember, you did nothing wrong. The truth is on our side. She opened the door to reveal two federal agents, with Marcus Hartley standing behind them, his face a mask of false concern. That's him, Marcus said, pointing at Samuel. That's the man who stole from my family. The lead agent, a tired-looking man named Agent Cooper, sighed. Yoder, you're under arrest for interstate transportation of stolen property. That necklace, Marcus said, his eyes fixing on Miriam's throat, belongs to my family. It was my grandmother's. Your grandmother was Emma Hartley, born Emma Hartley, Rebecca asked coolly. Yes, then you're a liar as well as a thief, Rebecca said. She pulled out a document from the album. Emma Hartley's maiden name was Emma Patterson. She was born in Philadelphia in 1923. She had no family jewels. This necklace has been in the Goldstein family for 400 years, stolen by the Nazis in 1941, and illegally purchased by your great-grandfather from war criminals. She showed Agent Cooper the documents. We have proof of everything, including proof that the Hartley family has been threatening and intimidating witnesses for decades. Agent Cooper looked through the papers, his expression changing from skeptical to intrigued. Senator Hartley, these are serious allegations, fabrications, Marcus snarled. That old fool Herman made it all up. Then you won't mind if we investigate fully? Agent Cooper asked mildly, including checking the authenticity of these documents and this recorded confession from Mr. Fisher. Amy held up her phone where Herman's video testimony was playing. Marcus's face went white as he heard Herman describing Emma's real story, her imprisonment in the asylum, her death. Turn that off, Marcus said. Why? Miriam asked. Afraid of the truth. More people were arriving. Rebecca's brother David, a sharp-dressed federal prosecutor, two lawyers from the Holocaust Museum, and surprisingly Walter and Betty Morrison, who'd driven through the night when Amy texted them. "This boy did nothing wrong," Walter said loudly. "Herman Fisher told me about that necklace, told me it was stolen twice over, said someday someone would come to make it right." "You can't prove anything," Marcus said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. That's when Moses did something unexpected. The dog had been sniffing around Marcus's feet, and suddenly he barked, pawing at the senator's pocket. A small leather journal fell out. Herman's first journal, the one Samuel had found in the garden. "You broke into my cabin," Samuel said. "You stole that journal." "That's breaking and entering," Agent Cooper noted. "And theft." Marcus's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. "That necklace is worth $50 million. It should have been mine. My grandfather promised." He stopped, realizing what he'd said. "Promised what?" Agent Cooper asked. "Senator, I think you should come with us for questioning." "This isn't over," Marcus hissed at Samuel. "You think you've won? I'll destroy you, all of you." "No," said a quiet voice from the doorway. "You won't." Everyone turned to see an elderly woman standing there, elegantly dressed despite her age. She was beautiful in that timeless way, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. "My name is Eleanor Hartley," she said. "I'm Marcus's aunt, Theodore's daughter. And I've been waiting 40 years for someone to finally tell the truth about what my father did to Emma." Marcus stared at her in shock. "Aunt Eleanor, what are you doing? What I should have done decades ago," she said. She looked at Samuel with grateful eyes. "You found Herman's evidence?" Samuel nodded. "Good. Then you also found Emma's letters. She wasn't my father's wife. She was my friend. The only person in that horrible house who showed me kindness. My father destroyed her because she dared to love someone else, someone who saw her as a person instead of property." She pulled out a thick envelope from her purse. "I've kept these for 40 years, documents proving my father's business was built on stolen Jewish artifacts, bribes and worse. I was too afraid to come forward before. But seeing this young man's courage," she handed the envelope to Agent Cooper. "I'm willing to testify to everything." Marcus tried to run, but the agent stopped him. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at Samuel with pure hatred. "This won't hold," he said. "My lawyers will have me out in an hour." "Maybe," Agent Cooper said, "but the court of public opinion is something else entirely." Indeed, Miriam's uploads had already gone viral. "Stolen twice" was trending, and news vans were pulling up outside. In the chaos that followed, reporters, lawyers, statements, Samuel found himself standing apart with Moses, feeling overwhelmed. He'd done what he came to do, but now what? He had no money, no home, nowhere to go. Miriam appeared beside him, the necklace still gleaming at her throat. "You look lost." "I am lost," Samuel admitted. "I don't belong in my old world, and I don't belong in this one either." "Maybe," Miriam said, "you belong in a new world, one you create yourself." She handed him a card. "My friend runs a free clinic in the Bronx. They need someone who understands both traditional and modern medicine, someone who can bridge cultures. The pay isn't much, but there's an apartment above the clinic." Samuel looked at the card, then at her. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you helped us without expecting anything in return. Because you chose righteousness over riches. And because," she smiled, "my grandmother always said the best matches are made through acts of courage." Rebecca appeared, putting her arm around her daughter. "What Miriam isn't telling you is that she's a doctor. She volunteers at that clinic." Samuel felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking but thawing. Hope, maybe, or possibility. "There's one more thing," Eleanor Hartley said, approaching them. "Herman's cabin and land. My father sold it to Herman for almost nothing because he thought the land was worthless. But I happen to know there's a development company that wants to build a resort there. The land is worth millions." She handed Samuel a business card. "This is my lawyer. He'll make sure you get fair market value if you decide to sell. Or you could keep it, build something there, a place for healing. Maybe, somewhere people can find peace. Samuel looked around the room at Rebecca wearing her family's history with pride, at Miriam smiling at him with warmth he'd thought he'd never see again, at Amy, who'd risked everything to help him, at the Morrisons who'd driven through the night to support him, at Eleanor, who'd finally found the courage to speak truth. This wasn't the ending he'd expected when he'd spent his last dollar on a broken-down cabin. But maybe that was the point. Sometimes you had to lose everything to find what really mattered. 3 weeks had passed since the arrest of Marcus Hartley, and Samuel's life had become something he didn't recognize. He sat in the small apartment above the Bronx clinic, Moses at his feet, reading through medical textbooks that Miriam had brought him. The news was playing on the old television, another segment about the stolen heritage scandal that had rocked Pennsylvania politics. Marcus had made bail, as expected, but his political career was over. More victims had come forward, other families whose artifacts had been stolen during the war and ended up in Hartley hands. The FBI had raided multiple Hartley properties, finding warehouses full of stolen art and jewels, but Samuel barely paid attention to the news anymore. He was focused on the paragraph about diabetes management in children, thinking about the young girl in his former community who died because insulin was considered English medicine. A knock at the door interrupted his studies. "It's open," he called. Miriam entered, carrying bags of groceries and medical supplies. She'd been coming by every day, claiming she needed to check on Moses, but they both knew better. "You need to eat actual food," she said, unpacking vegetables and bread. "Not just crackers and water." "I eat," Samuel protested. When? He couldn't answer, because he honestly didn't remember. The days had blurred together, studying, volunteering at the clinic, walking Moses, and trying not to think about the fact that he was living in a world he didn't understand on the charity of people he'd just met. "Samuel," Miriam said gently, sitting beside him, "you saved my family's history. You gave us back a piece of our souls. Why won't you let us help you in return?" "Because I didn't do it for reward," he said quietly. "In my culture, my former culture, we have a word, Gelassenheit. It means yielding, surrendering to God's will without expecting anything back." "That's beautiful," Miriam said, "but sometimes God's will includes accepting help. Sometimes the gift is in the receiving, not just the giving." Moses barked in agreement, and Miriam laughed. "See, even Moses thinks you're being stubborn." Her phone rang. She answered, and her face immediately grew serious. "When? Is anyone hurt?" She listened, then looked at Samuel with concern. "We'll be right there." "What's wrong?" "There's been a fire at your cabin. The Morrisons called. They saw the smoke and called the fire department." But she hesitated. "Samuel, it's gone. The cabin is completely destroyed." Samuel felt the news like a physical blow. He'd planned to go back, to rebuild it properly, to maybe create something beautiful from Herman's broken dreams. Now, even that was gone. "Marcus?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Probably, but proving it will be impossible. He's too smart to leave evidence." They drove to Pennsylvania in Miriam's car, Moses whining anxiously in the back seat. The closer they got to the mountain, the heavier Samuel's heart became. That cabin had represented possibility, a chance to build something new from the ashes of his old life. The scene that greeted them was worse than he'd imagined. The cabin was nothing but charred timbers and smoking rubble. The Morrisons were there, along with Amy and several firefighters. "Samuel!" Amy ran to him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. We tried to save something, anything, but it went up so fast." Walter Morrison looked grim. "Arson, no doubt about it. Accelerant everywhere, but the sheriff says without proof." "Without proof, it's just another unfortunate accident," Samuel finished bitterly. But Moses was acting strange, pulling toward the ruins, barking insistently. Samuel let him go, and the dog went straight to where the chimney had stood. The stones had fallen but were still largely intact, and Moses was pawing at one particular stone. "What is it, boy?" Samuel knelt beside him, moving the hot stones carefully with a stick. There, protected by the stone and miraculously unburned, was a metal box he'd never seen before. The eighth compartment, one Herman hadn't known about or hadn't mentioned. Inside was a single document and a photograph. The photograph showed a young Herman with an older man who looked remarkably similar to him. On the back was written Herman and his son Daniel. Herman had a son. Miriam gasped. The document was a birth certificate and adoption papers. Daniel Fisher, born 1930, adopted by the Fisher family in 1946. But there was a note attached in Herman's shaking hand. Daniel was Emma's son from her first marriage. Theodore never knew. Emma hid the pregnancy and sent the baby to live with relatives. After Emma died, I adopted him legally, raised him as my own. He never knew the truth about his mother. He died in Vietnam in 1968, but he had a daughter first. Her name is Jennifer, and she lives in California. She doesn't know about any of this. Samuel stared at the papers. Another piece of the puzzle, another life affected by the Hartley family's cruelty. "We have to find her," Miriam said. "She deserves to know about her grandmother, her real heritage." "No." Everyone turned to stare at Samuel. "No more," he said quietly. "The Hartleys have destroyed enough lives. Marcus burned this cabin to send a message. He'll hurt anyone connected to this story. I won't put another innocent person in danger. But she has a right to know," Miriam started. "She has a right to live in peace," Samuel countered. "Sometimes the greatest kindness is letting sleeping dogs lie." But even as he said it, he thought about his own life, how the truth about his community's practices had eaten at him, until he had to speak out. Consequences be damned. Could he really keep this secret from Emma's granddaughter? That evening they sat in Amy's house. She'd insisted on putting them up for the night. The Morrisons were there too, and Eleanor Hartley, who'd driven up when she heard about the fire. "I'm so ashamed of my family," Eleanor said. "Marcus was too much like his grandfather, but I never thought he'd go this far." "Will he face charges for the arson?" Samuel asked. "Doubtful. He was at a charity gala in Harrisburg. Hundreds of witnesses. He hired someone, of course, but proving it." She shook her head. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Betty Morrison spoke up. "You know, Herman told me something once. Said the real treasure wasn't in the walls of that cabin, but in what the cabin represented. A chance for redemption, for making things right. Fat lot of good that does." "Samuel now," Walter said. "Boy has nothing left." "That's not true," Eleanor said. She pulled out a check. "The development company still wants that land. They're offering $2 million. Samuel stared at the check. $2 million. He could build a hospital with that money. He could go to medical school. He could do anything. But there's a condition," Eleanor continued. "They want to build immediately. You'd have to sign tonight." "Tonight?" "Marcus is on the board of the development company. This is his way of trying to force you out completely. Take the money and disappear, or get nothing." Samuel looked around the room at these people who'd become his unlikely family. Amy, who'd risked her safety to help him. The Morrisons, who'd shown him kindness when he had nothing. Eleanor, who'd found courage in her 70s to stand against her own family. And Miriam, whose eyes held something that made his heart race in a way Sarah's never had. "What would you do?" he asked Miriam. "I'd tell Marcus Hartley to go to hell," she said firmly. "But I'm not you. I didn't grow up in a culture of pacifism and forgiveness." "We didn't forgive," Samuel said. "We shunned. We cast out. He stopped, a realization washing over him. "We were just like the Hartleys, weren't we? So convinced of our righteousness that we destroyed anyone who questioned us." "You're nothing like them," Amy said fiercely. "Aren't I? I'm sitting here deciding whether to keep a secret from someone who deserves the truth, just like my elders kept medical knowledge from our people. I'm choosing who gets to know their heritage and who doesn't." He stood abruptly. "I need air." Outside, Moses followed him to the garden where Amy grew vegetables. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light. Samuel thought about Herman, living with secrets for 40 years. About Emma, dying in an asylum for the crime of loving the wrong man. About Daniel, never knowing his real mother. About Jennifer in California, unaware of her grandmother's story. "You know what I have to do, don't you?" he said to Moses. The dog tilted his head, his mismatched eyes gleaming in the moonlight. Samuel went back inside. "I won't take the money," he said, "and we're going to find Jennifer. She deserves to know where she came from." Eleanor smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that, because I already found her." She pulled out a folder. "Jennifer Fisher Martinez. She's a social worker in Los Angeles, specializes in helping refugees and immigrants. She spent her whole life wondering about her father's family, why Herman never talked about the past. You contacted her?" "Not yet. I thought that should come from you." Samuel looked at the photograph, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and Emma's cheekbones. "What if Marcus goes after her?" "Then we protect her," Miriam said. "All of us. The story is already out there, Samuel. The world is watching. Marcus can't operate in the shadows anymore." The next morning, Samuel made the call. It took 3 tries before he could get the words out, but finally he told Jennifer everything. The silence on the other end lasted so long he thought she'd hung up. Then she said, "My father had nightmares. He'd call out for someone named Emma. He said it was nothing, just bad dreams from the war. But he wasn't in the war that young. Your grandmother loved him enough to give him up to save him," Samuel said. "And Herman loved him enough to raise him as his own." "I'm flying out tomorrow," Jennifer said. I need to understand." They met her at the Philadelphia airport. She looked even more like Emma, in person, and when she saw the photograph of her grandmother, she broke down crying. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "She looks so young, so full of hope." They drove her to the mountain, to the ruins of the cabin. Jennifer walked through the ashes, occasionally bending to pick up a piece of charred wood or melted metal. "This is where my grandfather lived, where he grieved," Samuel said, "where he tried to atone for not being able to save her." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "In my work, I see a lot of families destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. Refugees, immigrants, people fleeing violence or poverty. They all carry this guilt about what they couldn't save, who they couldn't protect, but survival itself is a form of resistance. Living, continuing, passing on stories, that's how we honor the lost." She turned to Samuel. "You've given me my history, my true story. That's worth more than any building." That evening they all gathered at Rebecca Goldstein's house. The Goldsteins, Jennifer, Eleanor, the Morrisons, Amy, and Samuel. Rebecca had prepared a feast, saying it was tradition to celebrate when lost family was found. "You're all family now," she said, "bound by something stronger than blood, bound by truth and courage." Miriam stood, raising her glass. "To Herman and Emma, whose love survived even death. To Jennifer, who carries their legacy forward. And to Samuel, who had the courage to do what was right, even when it cost him everything." "I didn't lose everything," Samuel said quietly, looking around the table. "I lost my old life, yes, but I found something I never had before. A family that chose me, not because of blood or tradition, but because of who I am." "Speaking of choosing," Jennifer said, pulling out a document, "I spoke to my lawyer. I want to put the land in a trust, use it to build a retreat center for refugees and people who've lost their communities. A place for healing and starting over. And I want you to run it, Samuel." Samuel stared at her. "I don't know anything about running." "You know about loss," Jennifer interrupted. "You know about exile and starting over. You know about choosing righteousness over comfort. That's all the qualification you need. And you'll have help," Miriam added, taking his hand. "The clinic can partner with the retreat. We can provide medical services, counseling." Samuel looked at their joined hands, then at Miriam's face. In her eyes, he saw something he'd never seen in Sarah's, not just love, but partnership, equality, shared purpose. "There's something else," Eleanor said. She pulled out a thick envelope. "Marcus had a heart attack last night. He's stable, but he's decided to withdraw from public life. and won't contest any of the charges. His lawyer sent this. It's a settlement. $5 million to be divided between the Goldstein family and Samuel, and clear title to the mountain land. Why? Samuel asked, suspicious. Because I told him if he didn't, I'd release the rest of what I have on the family, Eleanor said calmly. Sometimes the threat of truth is more powerful than truth itself. Rebecca shook her head. Keep it all. We have our necklace back. That's worth more than any money. Then we use it for the retreat, Jennifer said. Make something beautiful from all this pain. The mountain was alive with the sound of construction. Where the burned cabin once stood, a beautiful timber and stone building was rising. The main lodge of the Emma Fisher Center for Healing and Renewal. Samuel stood on the rise overlooking the work. Moses beside him as always, now with gray beginning to pepper his muzzle. The dormitory foundation is complete, Miriam said, coming up beside him, her hand naturally finding his. The simple gold band on her finger caught the morning light. They'd married 6 months ago in a ceremony that blended Jewish and Amish traditions, with Rebecca officiating and the Morrisons as witnesses. We'll be able to house 30 residents by spring. Samuel squeezed her hand, still sometimes unable to believe this was his life now. Your mother called. She and Jennifer have found 3 more families who need placement, refugees from Syria. We'll make room, Miriam said simply. That had become their motto. We'll make room, always space for one more broken soul, one more family fleeing persecution, one more person who didn't fit in the world they'd been given. A car wound up the newly paved road, and Samuel recognized Eleanor Hartley's silver sedan. She'd become one of their biggest supporters, funding scholarships for refugees to receive medical training. She emerged from the car, but she wasn't alone. A young woman followed her, mid-20s, plain dress, familiar features. Samuel's heart stopped. Sarah, she looked different, thinner, older, with lines around her eyes that spoke of hard years. Her hands twisted nervously in front of her. Hello, Samuel, she said quietly. I heard what you're building here. Miriam's hand tightened on his, but when he looked at her, her eyes held only compassion. She'd heard the whole story of Sarah, had held him while he grieved that loss, along with all the others. What are you doing here? Samuel asked, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I left, Samuel. 6 months ago. I couldn't, after what happened to you. Others started asking questions too, about the medicine, about the rules that made no sense. The elders got harsher, more controlling. When my nephew died from appendicitis, something so simple to fix, I couldn't stay high anymore. So they shunned you, Samuel said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, tears flowing freely now. My husband divorced me. My family won't speak to me. I have nothing, no one. Eleanor said, she said, you might have work here, that you help people who've lost everything. Samuel felt Miriam step slightly forward. Protective, but he didn't need protection anymore. The pain Sarah had caused him was real, but it had also led him here, to this life, to Miriam, to purpose. We always have room for people who need to start over, he said gently. Jennifer runs the resident program. She'll help you get settled. Sarah looked between him and Miriam, understanding dawning in her eyes. You're married? Yes, Miriam said simply, not unkindly. We are. Sarah nodded, wiping her tears. I'm glad. You deserve happiness, Samuel. You deserved someone brave enough to stand with you. I wasn't that person. You're brave now, Samuel said. It takes courage to leave everything you've known. As Eleanor led Sarah to the office, Miriam looked up at him. That was graceful. I learned grace from you, he said, kissing her forehead. From your family, from this place. Moses barked, his tail wagging as another car approached. This one Samuel recognized immediately, Amy's truck, carrying the Morrisons and a special cargo. Is it time? Miriam asked, excitedly. Samuel grinned. It's time. They'd been planning this for months. In the truck bed, carefully wrapped and protected, was a new stained glass window for the center's meditation room. But not just any window, one that Jennifer had commissioned from an artist who specialized in recovered religious art. The artist emerged from the truck, an elderly man named Isaac Goldstein, Rebecca's cousin who'd spent 50 years creating windows for synagogues around the world. "I've finished it," he said simply. "Come." They gathered in the meditation room: Samuel, Miriam, Jennifer, the Morrisons, Amy, Eleanor, Rebecca, who'd driven up for the occasion, and even Sarah, drawn by the crowd. Isaac and Walter carefully positioned the window in the eastern wall where the morning sun would hit it. When they unveiled it, there was a collective gasp. The window told a story in glass and light. At the center was a ruby-red heart, inspired by the necklace, from which grew a tree with many branches. In the branches were small scenes: a young couple holding hands, Herman and Emma, a soldier with a child, Daniel, a woman at an asylum window, Emma's imprisonment, a man in plain clothes walking with a dog, Samuel and Moses, hands exchanging a necklace, the return to the Goldsteins, and flames transforming into doves, the cabin fire becoming the retreat. But it was the top of the window that made Samuel's throat close with emotion. There, in brilliant gold and blue glass, were Hebrew letters spelling out Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, and below it in smaller English letters, Love Eternal. "It's perfect," Jennifer whispered. "It tells all our stories." Isaac smiled. "The artist who helped me design it said something interesting. She said broken glass, when put back together with skill and love, creates something more beautiful than unbroken glass ever could. The light shines differently through the cracks, creates new patterns." Samuel thought about that, about all of them, broken in different ways, coming together to create something beautiful. His shunning Herman's grief, Emma's tragedy, the Goldsteins' loss, Jennifer's search for identity, Eleanor's family shame, Sarah's exile, all those cracks letting in light. That evening they held the first official gathering in the meditation room. The residents, 17 so far from 6 different countries and various backgrounds, sat in a circle. There was Amara from Somalia, who'd fled civil war, Thomas, a veteran with PTSD, who'd lost his home, Maria and her children, escaping domestic violence, David, a former Orthodox Jew cast out for being gay, and others, each carrying their own story of loss and hope. Samuel stood to speak, something he did every week, though it still didn't come naturally to him. "When I bought a cabin with my last dollar," he began, "I thought I was purchasing shelter. What I actually bought was a chance to discover that the things we think are endings are often beginnings. The cabin is gone, but what it represented, sanctuary, truth, redemption, lives on in this place." He looked at Miriam, who nodded encouragingly. "We call this the Emma Fisher Center, because 2 people who never got to build a life together still managed to create a legacy of love. Their story reminds us that love isn't just about what we get to keep, it's about what we pass on, what we make possible for others." "What about when it hurts too much?" It was Sarah who asked, her voice small. "What about when you've lost so much that you don't know how to start over?" Samuel saw Miriam start to answer, but he gently touched her arm. This was his to say. "You start with one breath," he said. "One step, one day. You look for one small thing that doesn't hurt. Maybe it's the way light falls through a window. Maybe it's a dog who doesn't care about your past. Maybe it's a stranger offering you soup. You build from there slowly, and eventually you realize you're not building your old life back. You're building something new, something that couldn't have existed without the breaking. But some things can't be fixed," Thomas the veteran said roughly. "Some things are just broken forever." "Yes," Samuel agreed. "Some things can't be fixed. Herman couldn't bring Emma back. The Goldsteins couldn't recover all that was stolen. I can't return to my community." But he gestured to the window where the last rays of sun were turning the glass into fire. "We can make something new from the pieces. We can choose what to do with our brokenness." Moses, who'd been lying quietly, suddenly stood and walked to Sarah. The dog, who was usually reserved with strangers, laid his head in her lap. Sarah started crying, her hand tentatively petting his fur. "Even Moses knows," Betty Morrison said softly. "Everyone deserves comfort." As the gathering ended and people dispersed to their rooms or the communal kitchen, Samuel found himself alone in the meditation room with Miriam. The sun had set, but candles were lit, making the glass window glow differently, softer, more mysterious. "Do you ever regret it?" Miriam asked. "The life you could have had if you'd kept the necklace. $50 million. Samuel pulled her close. "Every path I didn't take led me here to you, to this. How could I regret that?" She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have something to tell you." Something in her tone made him pull back to look at her face. She was smiling, her eyes bright with tears. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. Samuel felt his knees go weak. He sank into a chair, pulling her onto his lap. A baby, she confirmed, "due in spring, when the refugees from Syria arrive. Good timing, a new life among new lives." Samuel pressed his hand to her still, flat stomach, wonder flooding through him. A child who would grow up here, in this place, built on truth and courage. A child who would know their whole history, the beautiful and the terrible, the love and the loss. "What should we name them?" he asked. "If it's a boy, Herman," Miriam said immediately, "for the man who kept love alive for 40 years. And if it's a girl," Miriam touched the window, her finger tracing the heart at the center, "Emma Hope, for the woman whose love survived everything, and for what this place represents." That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He walked the grounds with Moses, looking at the buildings under construction, the garden plots being prepared for spring, the playground Jennifer had insisted on including. 6 months from now, this place would be fully operational, housing 50 residents, providing medical care, counseling, job training, and most importantly, community for those who'd lost their own. He thought about his father, probably sitting in his dark house, convinced of his righteousness. He thought about Marcus Hartley, alone in his mansion, his empire crumbled. He thought about Herman, spending 40 years in grief and regret. Then he thought about tomorrow, teaching the refugee children English in the morning, helping Thomas fix the greenhouse after lunch, preparing for the arrival of Rebecca and Jennifer for Sabbath dinner. Simple things, but building something lasting, not from money or power, but from choosing to help, choosing to love, choosing to continue. Moses whined softly, and Samuel realized the dog was favoring his back leg. "Getting old, boy?" he asked, kneeling to check the leg. "We both are." But Moses just licked his face and wagged his tail, as if to say that getting old was a privilege not everyone got. As they headed back to the residence, Samuel saw a light in Sarah's window. She was probably crying, grieving everything she'd lost. He understood that grief had lived with it for 2 years now, but he also knew what she'd learn eventually, that grief, like broken glass, could let in light if you let it. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A van pulled up, and Samuel recognized several faces from his former community, young people, mostly, but a few older ones too. They stood uncertainly at the entrance, clearly hard-lived and determined. "We heard," one young man said. Samuel recognized him as his cousin Luke. "We heard about what you're doing here, about the medical clinic. My daughter, she has diabetes. The elders say it's God's will, but I can't watch her die, not when I know there's medicine that could save her." Samuel felt Miriam's hand slip into his wrist. "We can help," she said simply. "The clinic is open to everyone." As they led the group to the medical building, more cars began arriving. Word had spread through the Amish community, whispered conversations about the man who'd been shunned, but was now helping everyone, even those who'd cast him out. By noon, the clinic was full. Miriam and the other doctors worked tirelessly, treating conditions that had been left to fester for years. Samuel translated, explained, comforted. He watched his cousin's daughter receive her first insulin injection, saw the wonder in Luke's eyes as the little girl's color improved almost immediately. "They'll shun us for this," Luke said quietly. "Maybe," Samuel agreed, "but she'll live. Is it worth it?" Luke asked. "Losing everything?" Samuel looked around the clinic, at Miriam teaching a Syrian mother how to use an inhaler for her asthmatic son, at Jennifer counseling a veteran through a panic attack, at Sarah helping with translation, at his former community members finally receiving care they needed. "You don't lose everything," Samuel said. "You lose what was holding you back from becoming who you're meant to be." That evening, exhausted but fulfilled, Samuel sat with Herman's journal, the one he'd kept. He turned to the last entry, dated just days before Herman's death. "I thought love was about holding on to Emma, to grief, to regret. But maybe love is about letting go of what was so that what could be has room to grow. If someone finds this, know that every ending is also a beginning. Every loss makes space for something new." The necklace was never the real treasure. The real treasure was the chance to make things right, to transform pain into love. Doesn't die. It transforms, it continues, it finds new ways to exist in the world. Samuel closed the journal and looked out the window. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more refugees, more outcasts, more broken people seeking healing. But tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect. Miriam appeared in the doorway, her hand on her stomach. "Coming to bed?" "In a moment," he said. She came to him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "What are you thinking about? How a last dollar can buy you everything," he said. She laughed softly. "That doesn't make sense, doesn't it? I spent my last dollar on a broken cabin. That led me to Herman's secret, which led me to the Goldsteins, which led me to you, which led to all of this. $1 for a whole new life." "When you put it that way," she murmured against his shoulder. Moses padded in, settling at their feet with a contented sigh. Outside they could hear voices, residents gathering for evening meal, children playing, life continuing. "Herman was wrong about one thing," Samuel said. "What's that?" He said, "You could be rich or righteous, but not both. But look at us. We're the richest people in the world. Not because of money, but because of this." He gestured to encompass everything, the center, the people, the purpose, the love. Miriam turned him to face her, her eyes bright with tears. "You know what my grandmother says. She says you're proof that God works through ordinary people doing extraordinary things." "There's nothing extraordinary about doing what's right," Samuel said. "That's exactly what makes it extraordinary," she replied. As they stood there, holding each other while the mountains settled into darkness and the center hummed with life around them, Samuel finally understood what Herman had meant by love eternal. It wasn't about one perfect love lasting forever. It was about love itself continuing, passed from person to person, generation to generation, transforming pain into beauty, loss into purpose, endings into beginning. The baby kicked for the first stirf, just a flutter, but enough to make them both gasp. "Hello, little one," Samuel whispered to Miriam's belly. "Welcome to your story. It's a good one, I promise. Full of broken people who chose to build something beautiful." And in that moment, with his wife in his arms, their child growing between them, their chosen family all around them, and Moses snoring peacefully at their feet, Samuel Yoder, once Amish, once shunned, once broken, knew that he had finally come home, not to a place, but to a purpose, not to a building, but to a truth, that love, real love, doesn't just survive, it transforms everything it touches, turning last dollars into fortunes, strangers into family, and broken hearts into whole communities. The ruby necklace might have been worth $50 million, but what Samuel had found was priceless. The knowledge that sometimes the greatest treasure isn't what you keep, but what you give away. And in giving away everything, He had received more than he ever could have imagined. As the first stars appeared over the Pennsylvania mountains, the Emma Fisher Center for Healing and Renewal glowed with warm light, a beacon for all those who had lost their way, promising them what Samuel had found, that even when you spend your last dollar, even when you lose everything you thought mattered, love finds a way to make you rich again. The auditorium was packed. Samuel stood at the podium, looking out at an audience of hundreds, refugees, medical professionals, social workers, and most surprisingly, a delegation from his former Amish community, including his own father. Today, Samuel began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. We celebrate not just the 5th anniversary of the Emma Fisher Center, but the opening of our 10th satellite location. Applause thundered through the room. Miriam sat in the front row, their daughter Emma Hope on her lap, and their son Herman Jr. Harry playing with Moses' successor, a young German shepherd named Hope. We've helped over 3,000 people find new lives, Samuel continued. We've provided medical care to communities that had none. We've proven that bridges can be built between worlds that seem incompatible. But most importantly, we've shown that love is the most powerful force for change in the world. In the audience, Rebecca Goldstein, now in her 80s, held hands with Jennifer. Eleanor Hartley, despite her age, still served on the board. The Morrisons, Amy, and even Sarah, now the center's head of outreach, all beamed with pride. 5 years ago, I bought a cabin with my last dollar, Samuel said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Today, that dollar has multiplied into something beyond my wildest dreams. Not money, but meaning. Not riches, but relationships. Not a building, but a movement. He paused, his eyes finding his father's. The old man nodded just slightly, but it was enough. Forgiveness, like love, could transform even the deepest wounds. Herman Fisher once wrote that love is eternal. Samuel concluded. He was right. Love doesn't end with death, with loss, with tragedy. It continues, it grows, it transforms. Every person we help, every family we reunite, every life we save, that's Emma and Herman's love. Still alive, still changing the world. As he stepped down from the podium to thunderous applause, Emma Hope broke free from her mother and ran to him, her little arms wrapping around his legs. "Daddy," she said, looking up with eyes that held both her parents' strength. "Tell me the story again about the man and his dog, and the treasure in the walls." Samuel lifted her up, feeling the weight of her small body, the trust in her embrace. "It starts like this," he said, his voice soft but clear. "Once upon a time, there was a man who had lost everything, but he had $1 left, and a dog named Moses, and that was enough to change the world." As he began the story, their story, Samuel realized that this was the true treasure. Herman had hidden not gold or jewels, but the truth that love, when brave enough to act, could transform the most broken places into sanctuaries of hope. The last dollar had indeed bought everything that mattered, and the story, like love itself, would go on.